Hey, welcome back to Work in Process. I'm Daniel Glauser, Director of Construction here at Reisinger Build, and today's episode is going to be a little bit different than normal. Over the last year or so, we've been working on something internally that we're really proud of, a client guidebook. When I say guidebook, I don't mean like a brochure or a marketing piece or something that just sits on a coffee table with pretty pictures. What we wanted to create was something that was genuinely useful, something that helps the clients and architects as well better understand what the custom building process actually looks like. Because one thing we've learned after doing this for such a long time is that custom home building can feel incredibly overwhelming if you've never done it before. And the reality is most people haven't. Most of our clients, this is either their first custom home they've ever built, or maybe they built one once before, but it wasn't the same as the process that we use. Suddenly they're stepping into something that's incredibly exciting, but also incredibly complex. There are engineers, consultants, permitting, pricing, selections, budget decisions, scheduling, honestly, hundreds, if not thousands of decisions that have to happen before we even start building. So one thing we've realized over the years is that a lot of the frustration people experience during a custom home project usually doesn't come from bad intentions. It doesn't even necessarily come from bad decisions. A lot of frustration comes from the uncertainty, from not fully understanding how the process works, or why certain decisions matter, or why something simply might actually have downstream implications. And because of that, we found ourselves explaining the same concepts over and over again throughout the process. Not because people weren't listening, not because anyone was doing something wrong, but simply because custom home building is genuinely complicated. So eventually we asked ourselves, what if we gave people a roadmap from the beginning? Something they could reference throughout the journey. Something that helped future conversations make more sense. Something that made the process feel more transparent and more approachable. And ultimately, that became this, the guidebook. So today I want to talk a little bit about why we made it, what we've learned after years of building architecturally driven custom homes, and honestly, some of the biggest misconceptions we see around what actually makes a project successful. Because in our experience, really great homes happen when expectations are clear, communication is strong, and everyone is aligned. So let's talk about why we created the guidebook to begin with. One question people have asked us is, why spend over a year creating something like this? And honestly, that's a fair question. The answer is actually pretty simple. We found ourselves explaining the same things over and over again throughout the process. Questions like, why does pre-construction take so long? Why can't we know exactly the cost yet? And why does the builder need to be involved prior to construction? And again, it's not because clients weren't paying attention. It's because building a custom home is complicated. There are a lot of things happening behind the scenes that people simply haven't been exposed to before. And we realized that when clients better understand the process, everything just works better. Expectations are aligned, communication is improved, and confidence is improved. The experience overall becomes less stressful for both the clients and everyone involved. People felt more informed, and the future conversations became easier because there was always a shared understanding of how the process worked. The other audience for this, honestly, was also architects, because while many architects are familiar with the collaborative pre-construction process, not everyone has experience with it like our process. Sometimes a builder doesn't get involved until later. Sometimes pricing only happens after the drawings are complete, and sometimes the relationship is more transactional. And we wanted to better communicate the role we believe a thoughtful builder can play during design. Not influence design and not to take over the architect's work, but to support the vision, to help align costs and help think through constructability, also help identify challenges early on in design, helping reduce redesign later. Really, just being a good partner in the process. And there was another reason too. This guidebook also helps us hold ourselves accountable. Having a written framework forces clarity internally. It reminds us of the standards we want to hold ourselves to and the experience we want clients and architects to have when they work with us. Biggest misconceptions about custom building. So before we get too deep into what the guidebook is itself, I want to talk a little bit about something we see all the time, and that's sort of common misconceptions around custom home building. And, to be fair, most of these misconceptions are completely understandable. Most people haven't done this before, or if they have, they've not necessarily done it this way and had this same experience. So naturally, people come into the process with assumptions. Sometimes those assumptions are right, sometimes not so much. So, misconception number one, building a custom home is mostly about picking finishes. So this one actually comes up more than you might think. And look, finishes do matter. Cabinetry matters, lighting matters, stone matters. They're all really important decisions and they absolutely shape how the home feels. But in reality, finishes are just one small piece of a much larger process. When we think about what actually makes a successful custom home project, we're usually thinking about things like coordination and communication and sequencing and constructability, budget alignment, timing, problem solving, all those things. Really, what people don't always see is the amount of thought and collaboration happening behind the scenes to make a project successful. A beautiful home isn't usually just the result of one big decision. It's thousands of thoughtful decisions layered together over time. And ideally, those decisions are happening in a way that feels intentional, not reactive. Second misconception that we see a lot is that we'll figure it out later. This one is incredibly common. And honestly, we understand where it comes from. People are excited about the project. There's momentum. They want to get moving. They want to start building, quite frankly. And sometimes there's a temptation to think, we'll solve that detail later, or we'll make that decision later. We'll figure it out once construction starts. And the challenge with that is that construction has a way of making delayed decisions more expensive. Not because anyone is doing something wrong, but because everything is connected. A decision impacts framing. Framing impacts mechanical coordination affects schedule affects cost, and suddenly something that felt relatively simple at the start creates a ripple effect throughout the project. And one thing we've learned over time is that construction tends to be a very expensive place to solve problems. Pre-construction, that's where you want to prevent them. So that's why we go into that. And that doesn't always mean that it has to be perfectly resolved before construction starts. That's not really realistic either. But the more clarity we can create early, the better the outcome, the smoother the experience tends to be. And frankly, the less stressful the process becomes for everyone involved. All right, so misconception number 3 is the builder doesn't need to be involved until construction starts. We see that a lot. This is probably one of the biggest opportunities we see for stronger project outcomes. Traditionally, a lot of projects followed a pretty linear model. Architect designs the home, drawings get completed, the builder prices it, then construction begins. And in some situations that works, but for highly customized, architecturally driven homes, we found that the earlier the collaboration can start, the better the outcome. And I want to be careful here because this is important. When we're involved during design, we're not there to influence the architect's design. We're not there to take over the process. We're not there to do someone else's job. We see ourselves as partners. We're there to help align their vision and execution, helping understand the budget implications of the design, helping to think through constructability and evaluate materials and methods, really helping identify potential friction points early. Ultimately, helping support the architect's vision in a way that's actually buildable and aligned with the client's goals. Some of the best projects we've worked on have been projects where the architect, client, and builder were all collaborating as early as schematic design. Everyone was aligned, everyone was solving problems together, and honestly, you can feel the difference on a project like that. Misconception number 4. The builder should know exactly what the home will cost before construction starts. And this is probably the most understandable concern people have because we're talking about major financial decisions. Of course, people want certainty. We would too, obviously. But this is where custom home building can feel a little counterintuitive. Budget accuracy is directly tied to the completeness of information. And what I mean by that is the more complete the drawings, the more resolved the details, the more finalized the selections, the more accurate the pricing becomes. So early in design, we can establish strong forecasting ranges. And as the project evolves, we refine those numbers. That doesn't mean budgeting is a guesswork, but far from it. Forecasting and guaranteed certainty are not the same thing, especially in architecturally driven, complex custom homes, where complexity, detailing systems, and selections vary dramatically from one project to another. And honestly, all of these misconceptions really point to something bigger, that the process matters. Probably more than most people realize. Why process matters. One thing we found over time is that really successful projects usually aren't successful by accident. They're successful because there's a clear process, clear expectations, good communication, and a genuine collaboration. So here at Reisinger Build, we often come back to three things: communication, expectations, and collaboration. And while those words can sound simple, there's actually a lot inside them. Communication. When people hear good communication, they often think responsiveness, returning calls, answering emails, providing updates. And yeah, all of those things matter, but good communication, at least in our experience, is really about transparency. It's about proactively sharing information, having difficult conversations early instead of late. It's like explaining the why behind decisions, helping people understand trade-offs and understanding implications. Because custom home building involves uncertainty. That's just the reality. And uncertainty becomes much easier to navigate when communication is strong. Expectations. This one is huge. A lot of frustration in custom home building comes down to expectations. Who's responsible for what? When do selections need to happen? How does billing work? How does scheduling work? What decisions are urgent and when can we wait to make those decisions? The clearer the expectations become, the smoother the experience tends to feel. And that's really one of the goals of the Guidebook. It's to help create alignment early, help people understand what's coming before they're in the middle of it. Lastly, collaboration. This might be the most important one because great homes don't happen because one person is talented. They happen because a really good team is aligned. The client, the architect, the builder, the consultants, the interior designer. Everyone working toward the same goal. Some of the best projects we've ever been a part of have had this feeling of shared momentum. People communicating well, solving problems together, making decisions thoughtfully, respecting one another's expertise. And in our experience, that alignment often is what separates good projects from exceptional ones. Pre-construction, where great projects are won. One question we get all the time is, why does pre-construction take so long? And that's a fair question. Sometimes this phase lasts 6 months, sometimes 12, sometimes even longer, especially on highly customized projects. And from the outside looking in, it can sometimes feel like, are we actually making progress? Because there isn't any visible construction yet. Nothing is framed or being installed. No one's pouring concrete. But in reality, an enormous amount of work is happening during this phase. And honestly, one of the biggest mindset shifts in custom home building is understanding that success of a project is often determined long before construction begins. And when we say pre-construction, we're talking about a lot more than pricing. We're talking about budget development, cost estimating, consultant coordination, permitting, selections, constructability reviews, value engineering exercises, helping align design decisions with financial goals, helping the team understand where there may be challenges before they become expensive surprises. Because the reality is, the earlier we can identify something, the easier it is, usually, to solve. If there's a budget concern during design, we have options. If there's a constructability issue, we can think through solutions. If there's a detail that creates complications in sequencing or execution, we can address it collaboratively. And frankly, those conversations are much easier to have on paper than in the field. One thing we've learned over time is that construction is a very expensive place to discover unresolved decisions. Pre-construction is where you create clarity, and clarity creates confidence. Not just for the client, for the architect, the consultants, or the builder, for everyone involved. A question we sometimes hear, why not just move faster? Why not get through it? And honestly, we understand the instinct when people are excited about moving on a project, but speed early in the process can sometimes create friction later. We've often found that thoughtful alignment up front creates a smoother, faster, and more predictable construction experience. Kind of to say that another way, moving quickly during design can sometimes slow you down during construction. And one of the reasons we care so much about pre-construction is because it allows the entire team to get aligned before the real money starts moving quickly. Architect collaboration during pre-construction. This is where collaboration with architects becomes incredibly valuable. And honestly, this is probably one of the areas where our process differs from what some people may be used to. Rather than waiting for a complete set of drawings and pricing it at the very end, we prefer to work alongside the design team during design. And again, I want to be careful of how I frame this because it matters. We're not there to influence the architect's design. We're not there to value engineer the soul out of the project. We're not there to make everything simpler or cheaper. We are there simply to align vision and execution. Sometimes that means pricing exercises so the team understands the cost implications. Sometimes it means thinking through materials or systems. Sometimes it means constructability conversations. Sometimes it means simply helping the architect and client understand the downstream implications of a decision. Because ultimately, everyone is trying to accomplish the same thing, a beautifully executed home that aligns with the client's priorities. And honestly, some of the strongest architect-builder relationships we've experienced happen when there's trust early in the process, when conversations are collaborative, when people feel comfortable asking hard questions, when problems are solved together instead of handed off. One of the things we often say internally is, the cheapest and easiest time to solve a problem is before construction starts. And while no project is ever perfectly resolved before breaking ground, the more clarity we create during pre-construction, the stronger the outcome tends to be. Construction, what clients don't see. But once construction starts, something interesting happens. For the first time, progress becomes visible. Things start moving, site work begins, concrete gets poured, framing starts, mechanical systems start showing up. It's a lot of momentum and it's all very exciting. But what clients often don't see is the amount of coordination happening behind the scenes to make that progress possible. Because construction is really a sequencing exercise. And on architecturally driven custom homes, sequencing becomes incredibly important. What happens first? What has to happen before something else can happen? What trade is dependent on another trade? How do we coordinate dozens of moving pieces all at once? Because every decision affects another decision. And part of our responsibility during construction is helping make sure the right information is getting to the right people at the right time. That means coordinating with trade partners, working with architects, clarifying details, managing inspections, tracking schedules, monitoring quality, reviewing budgets. And honestly, construction is full of problem solving. That's just part of the reality of building highly customized homes. No set of drawings is ever perfect. No project unfolds exactly the way anyone imagined. Unexpected things happen and questions come up. And part of what matters is how those moments are handled. Because a well-managed project isn't one where nothing changes. A well-managed project is one where change is navigated thoughtfully. It's also why communication rhythm matters so much during construction. Weekly meetings, progress reports, regular updates, conversations around schedule, budget reviews, and open items. Because uncertainty creates anxiety and clarity creates confidence. The more visibility clients have into what's happening and why, the smoother the experience tends to feel. A question we hear fairly often is, what exactly is happening every week? And honestly, a lot. Sometimes progress is visible. Sometimes progress is coordination. Sometimes progress is solving something before it becomes a problem. And sometimes progress is simply putting the right pieces in place so the next phase can move efficiently. Because what looks quiet on a construction site often isn't actually quiet at all. There's usually a tremendous amount of coordination happening underneath the surface. What a project manager actually does. I think project management is probably one of the least understood parts of custom home building. And honestly, that's understandable because from the outside, it can sometimes look like the project manager is simply supervising the work on site, making sure the trades show up and walking the house, checking quality. Sure, that's part of the role. But in reality, the scope of what a strong project manager does is much broader than what people realize. In many ways, the project manager becomes the conductor of the entire process. They're helping orchestrate an enormous number of moving parts simultaneously. They're interpreting plans, coordinating with architects and consultants, communicating with trade partners, managing sequencing. They're monitoring quality and tracking budgets, helping maintain the schedule. And really, they're helping anticipate challenges before they become disruptions. And at the same time, they're helping guide the client through the process. Because one thing we found is that even incredibly sophisticated clients, people who are very successful in their own fields, are still navigating something that's unfamiliar when it comes to custom home building. There are decisions to make, trade-offs to understand, questions that come up, moments of uncertainty. And the part of the project manager's responsibility is helping create clarity through all of that, helping people understand what's happening, helping them understand what decisions matter, helping them understand timing, helping bring them along on the journey instead of feeling like construction is happening to them. Honestly, the best project managers are balancing a lot of different skills at the same time because they're often managing relationships just as much as they're managing construction. One thing I think is important for people to understand is when you hire a home builder, you're not hiring a person. You're hiring a team, a system. You're hiring leadership oversight, project management, site support, service support, different people stepping into different roles at different moments throughout the project. And especially on complex custom homes, that team structure really matters because no one person is building the house. Really, successful projects happen when strong teams are working together towards the same goal. Honestly, when projects feel smooth, when communication feels clear, when the client feels informed, there's usually a really strong project management structure underneath all of that, even if most people never fully see it. Why we use a cost-plus structure. One question we get fairly often, and understandably so, is why does Risinger Build work under a cost-plus model instead of a fixed price? Honestly, this is one of those topics where we completely understand why people have questions, because at first glance, cost-plus can feel uncomfortable. People naturally want certainty, especially when they're making a significant financial investment. Questions come up like, isn't there a guaranteed number? Or what protects me from runaway costs? How do I know the budget won't just continue growing? Honestly, those are reasonable questions. We'd probably ask the same thing. The reason we've chosen this model is because in our experience, it tends to create better alignment, better transparency, and more flexibility for highly customized homes. And I think one of the most important things to understand is that custom homes are not products. They're prototypes. Every site is different. Every architect is different. Every set of priorities is different. Every detail package is different. Everything that the client values is different. Some clients care deeply about performance. Some care deeply about detailing. Some care deeply about timelines. Most care about all three. And because of that, there are naturally variables that evolve as design progresses and construction unfolds. A common misconception around cost plus is that sometimes people assume that because we establish a budget, that budget is somehow disconnected from reality. And that's not the case at all. We spend a tremendous amount of effort forecasting cost, estimating, pricing exercises through design, refining budgets as drawings and decisions become more complete. But forecasting and guaranteed certainty are not the same thing. And this is where the completeness of the information really matters. The more complete the plans, the more complete the specifications, the more finalized the selections, the more accurate forecasting becomes. So why not fixed price? Some people ask, wouldn't fixed price be simpler? And in some situations, maybe, but a fixed price project often requires builders to carry additional risk for unknowns. And what usually happens in practice is that contingencies and assumptions get built into pricing to account for uncertainty. In other words, clients may be paying for risks that never actually happen. Under Cost Plus, clients pay actual costs, not padded assumptions or hypothetical scenarios, the actual cost, plus a clearly defined builder fee. Importantly, it creates flexibility because, let's be honest, designs evolve, priorities shift, ideas improve. Sometimes people want to make changes, sometimes they don't. And Cost Plus allows that evolution to happen without punitive change order structures every time something shifts. And transparency matters. This is another important part of why we believe in the model, is transparency. Clients see invoices, they see the receipts, they get the budget updates, the monthly documentation, and all that visibility, it really matters because trust matters. And in our experience, transparency helps build trust. Now, does Cost Plus eliminate uncertainty? It doesn't. Custom home building will always involve unknowns, but what we found is that it creates a framework for navigating uncertainty collaboratively and transparently. And for architecturally driven homes, we found that to be a strong fit. Move-in isn't the finish line. One thing we care deeply about at Reisinger Build is making sure that move-in doesn't feel like the finish line, because while construction may technically be complete, the relationship really shouldn't stop there. There's still commissioning, punch list work, systems onboarding, warranty support, questions that naturally come up as people begin living in the house. And honestly, especially with high-performance homes, there's usually a learning curve. These homes are sophisticated. Mechanical systems are advanced. Environmental control is different. Performance expectations are different. And part of our responsibility is helping clients understand how to live with and care for those systems over time. Because high-performing homes tend to perform best when they're maintained thoughtfully. And frankly, we want clients to feel supported long after construction ends, not abandoned, not like they received keys and suddenly the relationship disappears. We want people to feel like they still have a team behind them, because ultimately, we're not just trying to build houses, we're trying to build homes that perform beautifully, age well, and continue serving families for decades. So at the end of the day, that's what this guidebook is really all about. It's about helping people feel more confident, more supported while navigating what is honestly a very complicated process, because custom home building, it's complex. There are a lot of moving pieces, a lot of decisions and uncertainty. But in our experience, the projects that tend to go best are the ones where expectations are clear. Communication is strong, and everyone is aligned around the same goal. And honestly, that's what we're trying to create through this process. Not just beautiful homes, but a really strong experience getting you there. So if you're considering building, or you're an architect thinking about how to create a stronger outcome for your projects, we'd always be happy to sit down, talk through how we think about building, and share a copy of the guidebook. So that does it for another episode of Work in Process. If you have any questions, topic suggestions, or want to reach out to us regarding a project, email us at hello@reisingerbuild.com and follow us on Instagram at reisingerbuild_ATX.